It was just a few months ago that hundreds of scientists wrote to the Prime Minister calling on him to stop what they called an extinction crisis. Since then, bushfires and heat waves are thought to have further decimated many animal populations. And scientists say the crisis is now worse than ever. Political reporter Alexandra Beach has more.
That's the last recorded call of the last surviving Christmas Island pipistrelle. The tiny bat died and the species became extinct more than 10 years ago. Now, scientists say a growing number of other native animals face the same fate.
We're seeing now the rather frightening combination of drought, heat waves and bushfires. All of those extreme events affect all species, including humans. But when they all come together, that is a particularly lethal combination.
Macquarie University biology professor Leslie Hughes is one of hundreds of scientists who wrote to the Prime Minister Scott Morrison late last year demanding action on what they've called an extinction crisis. She says since then, devastating bushfires only made things worse, and heat waves, expected to become more common in the years ahead due to climate change, are also a worry.
One of the things that keeps me up at night is the flying fox situation. Flying foxes are very, very vulnerable, especially the young and the lactating females, to hot conditions, and they just drop dead out of the trees. So, we had a situation earlier with the spectacle flying fox in Queensland. That's a rare and endangered species. We lost a third of the entire species in a single hot day in a heat wave.
She's worried the federal government's still not doing enough to protect Australia's wildlife. It's currently completing its once-in-a-decade review of the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. But Leslie Hughes is worried several senior MPs have been spruiking plans to reduce green tape.
That's really code for diminishing existing protection. And if we consider that the existing level of protection is totally inadequate, weakening that further is a really shocking prospect.
That's a concern that Tim Bashara from the Wilderness Society shares.
They're talking about the impact and the impulse of green tape. They're not talking about how they can play their role better to conserve these species and address this crisis.
And he warns many threatened species have already taken a massive hit over recent months.
I am certain that these fires, this drought, these heat waves will have affected the conservation status for dozens of species. Things that we might have thought would be common are now probably officially vulnerable. Things that we thought vulnerable will now certainly be endangered. And this is how extinction works. Things potter along at a certain trajectory, and then you have a major environmental impulse, whether it's disease or fire or drought, and you get the species falling off another cliff, and then it flattens out for a while, and then you have another one. And we're seeing this over and over and over again right around the country, and it seems to be worsening.
The Environment Minister, Susan Lee, says she recently held a roundtable with scientists to discuss issues affecting these animals, and she's urging the experts to have their say on the review of environmental laws.
I want to listen to scientists. I want to hear their views, and I want their voices to speak through any legislation or regulation that we implement.
The ministers also downplayed concerns that this review is about cutting green tape rather than protecting animals.
Everyone would agree that the environment must be protected, and when we list endangered, threatened, vulnerable species, that the outcomes need to be maximised for them. And sometimes, that means that developments have conditions, and sometimes they don't go ahead at all. Now, the term green tape means different things to different people. What it means to me is that if you are achieving this environmental outcome, how can you do it without tying everybody up in knots around administration, bureaucracy, and initiatives that don't make sense?
That review is due to report back to the Minister next year.
Alexandra Beach reporting.